the promise that I made to Josh Del Sol, the guy who, sort of the Michael Moore, Josh Fox, the documentary maker who narrates this thing, I just talked to him on the phone this afternoon. He reminded me, please, if you have everybody sign in, you give this man your email address, he's not going to spam you as mercilessly as Joel Tyner. So please, if you could sign that. And I have, if you want, it's kind of a handy dandy little handout, so if you want extras of those, there's that. I also wanted to make sure that everybody here comes out to this. I'm having a forum at Rhinebeck Town Hall on Tuesday, September 30th, about the oil trains. And very briefly, in April and May of this year, I got the Democratic caucus in the county legislature to sign letters to the DEC. The second one very strong, urging for a moratorium on the oil trains and the oil barges in our region until it can be proven safe. Last Monday, a week and a half ago, I got a letter signed by Marge Horton, a Republican county legislator from East Fishkill, and 7 Democrats saying that why can't the DEC fully release the results of their oil spill drill from last November. You may have heard that on WMC. So just put that out there. If you're interested in that issue, that's Tuesday, September 30th. Is that Dr. David Carpenter himself? No. Hey, look. Okay. Thank you, sir. Pleasure. So if you would just like to sit in one of those two chairs, and I'm just I'm briefing everybody very briefly. Michelle Hertz, who just very modestly decided to sit over there. She brought these. What you need to know about wireless radiation in your baby. The reason why I'm doing this, I've been doing an activist for 20 years, 11th year in the Dutchess County Legislature. A lot of you may just walk out the door without taking these, so I'm making sure everybody gets one. So, there you go. Take one and pass it down, please. The man, the myth, the legend, the director of the SUNY Oberly Institute for Health and the Environment, and the author of the 2012 Bioinitiative Report, bioinitiative.org, Dr. David Kotler. This is the website, okay? I know tree killer, Joel Tyner, you're a tree killer, but a lot of you may not pass this along to your family, friends, relatives, co-workers. You may not look it up, so I'm giving you his work. I've been attacked, somewhat justifiably, as a tree killer for many years. This is also courtesy of Michelle Hertz. Wonderful stuff that I should be handing out, but she gets the credit because she brought it this evening. This is stuff that Josh Del Sol, the director of this film we're about to screen, he begged me to copy and distribute this for you. Thanks to Raji and Steve and Weston, I attended, there were about 100 people in Woodstock. You guys organized a screening. And very potent thing that he was talking about was personal responsibility, holding liable Central Hudson National Grid. You know, I mean, Dr. Carpenter has talked about if the cables are buried underground, they're much safer, much less EMF radiation. And anyway, take a look at this. I will be honest with you, I haven't had time to review all this, but there's some very interesting literature here. Apparently, Josh Del Sol got an attorney in New York State to develop, like, if my friends who live on Salt Point Turnpike and Clinton Corners, if they want to do battle with Central Hudson National Grid, you know, Central Hudson cut off Raji and Steve's power because they were so if you want a little bit of extra legal firepower to do battle with the utility power structure on the so-called smart meter issue, take that and pass it down. I'm almost done. Josh Del Sol, also I asked him, oh Josh, could you give me an update on like 4 or 5 of the latest developments? And I'm not even going to read this, so I just copied the email that he sent me about some of the latest things that have been going on. So take one of those. I'm almost done. And then Dr. David Carpenter will speak, and the rest of the folks up here. Sharon Kotler and Ray Oberly are here from NoMonsterPowerlines.com. This is not as pretty as I think what Ray and Sharon have, but this is the website. And I finally signed on to the petition. And everybody should take a blank of what Ray has, but this is just so you have it from the NoMonsterPowerlines.com. So I'm almost done. And last but not least, just like last October, September, I launched a petition against the high voltage lines overground. Part of that petition, I had Googled some stuff from Dr. Carpenter about kids who grow up within 100 meters of power lines, lacking a certain gene in their DNA, or 400% more likely to develop leukemia or something like that. That was integrated into my original petition against the new power line transmission upgrade. But also integrated into that was the whole idea of locally generated green power. And so Cornell and Stanford came out with this report a year and a half ago saying we don't need fossil fuels at all, locally generated green power. And so and that's the last of my handout. I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to sit over here so I can get a good view while with my iPhone I record the comments. Dr. David Carpenter, if you could talk for a little bit about your work, about director of the SUNY Albany Institute for Health and the Environment. You've heard him on WNC Northeast Public Radio for decades talking about PCBs in the Hudson. Frankly, I can't believe when I called the phone number for him a month or two ago, he just picked up the phone. Hello, Dr. Carpenter. And he's actually here. And so please give this man a round of applause one more time. If you could just, you can have a half hour if you want, or even longer.
I want that long.
Definitely the top expert in the state on EMF radiation, maybe the entire country, if not the planet. Go ahead.
For those kind words, I don't know whether that's true or not, so I don't know if you can believe anything he says. In any case, how did I get involved in EMF? Before I came to Albany in 1980, I worked for the Department of Defense in Armed Forces Radiobiology Research Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, right across the street from NIH. And although it wasn't my own research then, and it still isn't my own research now, there were studies. The Defense Department was very interested in microwaves because radar was being put all over the place, and there were health concerns being alleged, not really documented. So again, I saw some of the research that was done right across the gully from my office. Never thought I'd have anything to do with it. So I came to New York in 1980 as the director of the Wadsworth Labs for the New York State Department of Health. 2 weeks before I got here, there had been a settlement between the State Power Authority and the State Public Service Commission over concerns expressed by the high voltage power line that brought power into New York from Messina down to Marston. And there had been very little research around the question of are there human health effects from exposure to magnetic fields. Now, magnetic fields are quite different from microwaves. The magnetic fields come from electricity. They are a function of how much current is flowing through a wire. There are actually two kinds of fields associated with electricity. There's the electric field, which is related to the voltage, and the magnetic field that's related to the current. Both of them fall off with distance from the source, and both of them are vectors. And that is to say, they move around the wire. They have a direction. And this is why, as you just heard, buried lines have less magnetic field than lines above ground, because the wire carrying the current this way is next to the wire carrying the current this way, and the magnetic fields balance each other. Well, as I said, there was very little evidence that there were problems with electric wires, especially high voltage power lines. But in 1979, there had been one study published in a very good journal, but got very little attention. It demonstrated that in Denver, Colorado, if you looked at children that had cancer, they were likely to live in a home that was close to a power line. And these were not high voltage power lines, these were neighborhood power lines. But the investigators, Nancy Wertheimer and Ed Leeper, they went around and surveying all the homes of kids that had cancer. And they found that, as compared to kids that didn't have cancer, they found that the diameter of the wire was bigger around the homes with kids with cancer, and the wires were closer to the house. Now, why is the diameter of the wire important? Well, most electric cable is made of copper, and copper is expensive. So if you only are using a small current, you use a small wire. If you're using a big wire, that suggests a big current. But they did not have direct measurements of the magnetic field. But they reported that magnetic fields were associated, which suggests possibly cause, childhood cancer, and that the risk was greatest for leukemia, which is the most common childhood cancer. So when I came to Albany, first of all, I was a new guy on the block and didn't have a full plate. And secondly, I had a little more experience than anybody else around here did on the whole issue of electromagnetic fields. Now, let me say a little bit about the electromagnetic spectrum, because that goes all the way from the extra low frequency, which is what we have from electric lights and power lines. In this country, they're at 60 cycles per second. So it's a sine wave, and it's a sine wave of energy without any mass. Visible light is an electromagnetic field, but visible light has a much higher frequency. And the reason you can distinguish violet from red is that the frequency for violet is faster than the frequency for red. So the electromagnetic spectrum goes from these very low frequencies, like are used in electricity, to extremely high frequencies, like X-rays and gamma rays and cosmic rays. These are very high frequency and very high in energy. So they have sufficient energy that they can directly damage DNA and cause cancer. But all of them are this energy without any mass. Now that is to be distinguished from the kind of radioactivity that you get from uranium and even carbon-14, other forms of radioactivity, which is particles that have a mass that are moving at high energy, and they can directly damage DNA too. But people talk within the electromagnetic spectrum of the ionizing portion, which is the X-rays, cosmic rays, gamma rays, and then the non-ionizing portion, which is everything below that. And that includes ultraviolet, the visible light that we can see, the infrared, the electromagnetic radiation comes from the sun that heats the earth, without which light would be impossible. And then below that, there's a whole large range of frequencies that are basically microwaves. And these are the frequencies we used for cell phones, for radio and television transmission. And the reason you can select one radio station and distinguish it from another is that they are slightly different frequencies. And then below that, the extra low frequency from the power lines. Well, the physicists would have it that the only way that there could be any harmful effect is if there's sufficient energy to damage DNA. So they deny that there can be any health effects of the non-ionizing portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. And to some sense, that seems reasonable. Life couldn't exist without light. And we don't think of visible light as being dangerous, and I don't think it is. Infrared energy from the sun heats the earth. We don't think of that as being dangerous. So it was quite heretical when this early report came out suggesting that the magnetic fields associated with low frequency electromagnetic fields caused cancer. And so when we had $5 million assessed from all New York State utilities, and we were tasked with developing a research program that would try to determine whether there are any adverse health effects of electric and magnetic fields. We funded 14 different projects. Only 2 of them were human studies. And one was specifically designed to try to replicate this earlier report of childhood leukemia. That study we did in Denver, Colorado, because that's where the first study was done. It did not involve the same children. It focused only on leukemia. And we found results that replicated the earlier study, showing that if a child lived in a home that had high magnetic fields, it was at greater risk of developing leukemia. And in addition to using these surrogate measures, looking at the diameter of the wire and the proximity to the house, we took measurements in the homes. And we actually found that with the measurements, there also was a significant relationship, but it was not quite as strong as this surrogate relationship. And that was a surprise at first, but then we decided, well, perhaps it's not such a surprise, because when you go into a home and take a measurement of the magnetic field, that's one point in time. It doesn't give you an average over long periods of time. Well, that was the most striking study, striking result from our 14 studies. We had a study of magnetic field exposure in adults, and that did not give significant results. But if you think about it, since all electricity generates magnetic fields, and we were only looking at the magnetic fields in the residence from the power line in the street, well, what goes on in your house? You have all these appliances. They all generate magnetic fields. They fall off with distance. But if you sit on your toaster, you're going to get exposed. Electric razors generate very high magnetic fields. All of this was just noise in the system. There's been one study since then done in Scandinavia that asked the question, what about leukemia in adults if you take measurements of what the magnetic fields are in their home, and you also take measurements of what the magnetic fields are at work, because most people spend most of the time at work and at home. That still misses the magnetic fields when you're out playing golf, or you're walking under, when you're in the supermarket, when you go doing other things. But what that study showed is that there wasn't a significant association with leukemia with the magnetic field measured at home. There wasn't a significant relationship with the magnetic field at work, but if you considered both of them, there was a fourfold elevated risk of leukemia in adults. So we found lots of other positive effects in the animal studies and the cell studies, but they were more difficult to say this constitutes a health hazard. But we did find biological effects in just about every animal and cellular study we did, with one exception. We did not find genetic effects. So we have no evidence that these magnetic fields, I should say we have found almost nothing from the electric fields. The electric fields don't seem to be very dangerous, but the magnetic fields did show effects in cell studies, in animal studies, but it was hard to say that that constitutes a health risk for people. So what happened after that? Well, those results were published in the late 1980s. And after that, I was officially declared the spokesperson for New York State on electromagnetic field health effects. And I held that position until I left employment by the Department of Health in 1998. I thought maybe I could be free of worrying about electromagnetic fields. Not anyway. I've been probably on every national and international committee. Josh still comes and interviews me. I was invited to serve as the co-editor of the Bioinitiative report, which is a web-based report, and probably many of you know about it, but if you don't, go to www.bioinitiative.org. It was first published in 1987. It was updated in 2012, and there have been additional updates since that time, and it's an encyclopedic review of all of the information. It's more information than you ever wanted to know with reference to the literature that exists on electromagnetic magnetic field health effects. So what's happened in the meantime? Well, there have been a number of studies that have re-investigated the association between both childhood and adult leukemia and exposure to magnetic fields. In 1991, I believe it was 1991, the World Health Organization, through the International Agency for Research on Cancer, declared power line magnetic fields, to be possible human carcinogens. Now, possible is not super strong. It's not probable with some things are, or no human carcinogens, as other chemicals are. I've been on one of the committees, the Committee on PCBs, which a year ago declared PCBs to be known human carcinogens applied to all PCBs. The World Health Organization has a requirement that there be proof in humans, there be proof in animals, and there be a known mechanism that's responsible for the cancer. Well, the animal results with power line fields have in general not shown that that you can produce cancer in animals. I think there's some reasons for that, because the currents induced in a small animal are not the same as in a big animal. They're not the same in a four-legged animal as a two-legged animal. So it may not be, unlike chemical studies, that means very much. The other criterion is a mechanism that explains why it would cause cancer. We do know, and our studies show, that these fields don't directly damage DNA. So how does it cause cancer? Well, we can't, to this point, say this is the mechanism, but we know about 6 or 8 possible mechanisms. We know effects of magnetic fields, all of which could underlie cancer. They generate free radicals. Free radicals are very damaging. We know sunlight actually generates free radicals. That's why you get skin cancer. They induce genes, and they induce a whole variety of specific genes. Some of them are genes associated with various kinds of injury. Genes that are called heat shock proteins. They were called that because initially animals themselves were tested by heating them up, and it caused damage and induced these genes. There are a variety of other studies showing effects in brain, in blood cells, and other organ systems that can be a mechanism. But we don't have a single mechanism that we can say. So there still is controversy around all of this, because the physics and the engineering community are insistent that you can't have any effects of these low energy fields. The human studies are very consistent in showing adverse health effects. But the animal studies show some effects, but they don't show cancer. All right, let me move from that. I realize that the power line is the big issue down here. But the other hot topic, and smart meters. Well, the radio frequency fields got very little attention for many years. And they've gotten a lot more attention recently. And so radio frequency is everything from AM and FM transmission, television transmission, cell phones, cell towers, Wi-Fi, smart meters, radar. All of these use different frequencies. They're higher frequencies than those associated with power. And the question is, do they have adverse health effects? Well, the strongest evidence that they have adverse health effects comes from studies of people that have used cell phones, held them to their head for long periods of time over many years. And very clearly, that causes an increase in the risk of brain cancer. Now, I didn't mention brain cancer earlier, but while the evidence for power line fields and leukemia is very strong, there's always been some evidence for an increase in brain cancer. And that came from even the very earliest studies. a lot of evidence for changes in the brain. One of the strongest evidence is a study that was done by the director of one of the institutes at NIH, who showed that if you hold a cell phone to your head that's muted, so you don't know whether it's on or not, just its being on will trigger an increase in glucose utilization of the brain in that part of right near where the cell phone is. The evidence is that the increase in risk of brain cancer, most people use their cell phone on the same side of the head all the time. It's only on that side of the head that there's an increase in the risk of brain cancer. Now,